Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to the Wasteland, my weekly show where I take a deep dive into a particular film, and we're in that 11th hour of 2024 as we get to the end of this insane 80 weeks of John Ford. And this is actually a very special episode, and I did not tell Corey, my guest, before we started recording that this is actually the 200th episode of Welcome to the Wasteland.
Kudos to you, man. Honestly.
So I've been doing this show for almost 4 years at this point, starting with when I literally I was just talking to my camera, doing the Coen brothers. I kind of wish I could go back and redo some of those episodes and actually have guests on them. But I did the Coens, and then I did Stanley Kubrick, and then Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, John Carpenter, and now John
Dang.
Ford. And we got Wes Anderson and Hayao Miyazaki on the horizon. So
Ooh.
some interesting ones for 2025. But we got to get through the home stretch here
Right.
because this is the fifth to last episode of my John Ford series, and we have a doozy for this one. It's The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, one of John Ford's most famous films. But for those who have not tuned into the show before, we have three segments. So Corey and I are going to be talking about current coming attractions for this Thanksgiving week as we get there for the technically a double release date of Wednesday the 27th before Thanksgiving and then Friday the 29th. And then we'll talk about our feature film and then we have some recommendations for you. So, Corey and I are both on the same page. Well, first off, the big movie that's coming out this week is Moana 2.
Yeah.
So, which was supposed to be a television series on Disney Plus,
Was it
and then
really?
they repackaged it apparently to
I was just
turn it
gonna
into a
say
movie.
it felt like maybe I missed the boat, but I felt like it really didn't get like the hype or like the push that it really
No,
seemed
this
to
kind of
need.
came out of nowhere. I think they
Yeah.
officially made this announcement like 6 months ago that this was actually releasing in
Wow.
theaters, which is wild for a big animated film from
Yeah.
Disney. But that's because it was supposed to be a Disney Plus show, and they're just like, let's repackage it and make money. But we're both on the same page. We heard Daniel Craig in a Luca Guadagnino film, Queer. So, Corey, what are you interested in this particular film?
I mean, what is it? It's Burroughs, so I mean that's always fun. But
Yeah.
I think I'm not too familiar with director. Obviously, I think the most that I've really come to know was his remake of Suspiria. So I think that's kind of where I really gravitate towards him. Like, okay, I loved what he did with that. And so I'm interested to see what this really plays with. At least from what I saw in like the trailers and things like that, visually it looks really fun. So
Mhm.
I think we'll get some really cool what's the word? It's just imagery, really is what
Mhm.
I'm thinking. With all like the small models, it seems like, and all it
Mhm.
just super weird stuff. So I'm all for it.
Yeah, it's interesting because you brought up William S. Burroughs, who wrote like Naked Lunch and stuff like that.
Right.
This is probably a lot less weird expat story, but it's still that interesting kind of like man in a strange land.
Yeah.
And that man is Daniel Craig. So that got my attention for that because ever since like Bond in his life has kind of been wrapping up, he like I could get Benoit Blanc films for forever. I could keep watching him play Kentucky Fried CSI KFC. Just this foghorn leghorn private detective. But like this has Leslie Manville in it, Jason Schwartzman. So I like the cast. Luca Guadagnino, directed Challengers that came out this year
Mm,
too. Bones and All, Call Me by Your Name, and I'm a huge fan of his Suspiria remake. It is very different Suspiria
it
than
is.
Argento Suspiria. It is there's some moments in in his Suspiria remake that haunt me
Yeah.
still.
It gets a little kooky.
That body horror in it is something else. But this seems like a really interesting film, and we're getting at that point where we're starting to get a lot of like the awards buzzy
Yeah.
kind of films. and also like Craven the Hunter, which I will not be talking about in a couple of weeks because that is certainly not my most anticipated movie for that weekend it's coming
It
out.
kind of looks good. I don't.
To be fair, it looks better than most of
I
these
think that's what that
Sony.
was. I think that's what it is. Okay, it looks better than I originally envisioned it being. So
Well, compared to Morbius and Madam
yeah,
Web, this
yeah.
looks like an Oscar-winning film. But it does have Russell Crowe and the Rhino in it. And I'm kind of just like, I'm morbidly curious to see Giant Rhino Man. Um, Played by Alessandro Nivola of all people. So, but that's Thanksgiving week here. I am sure Queer is going to be making a ton of money. No, Moana will be.
Yeah.
So everybody and their family and their little kids will be seeing Moana, and we'll find out what songs we're going to hear 50 million times moving forward. And if they don't bring back Jermaine Clement as Tamatoa for a new number, I will riot
I second that. Good call on that one.
because I had Shiny as my ringtone for a while.
Oh,
Um,
heck yeah.
I just remember sitting in the theater for Moana and just being like, "Is that Jermaine
Like,
as a
hold on.
giant crab monster?" And it is. But speaking of not giant crab movie, this is a much more grounded Western, as we're going to be talking about The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. And this came out in 1962. A senator returns to a Western town for the funeral of an old friend and tells the story of his origins, which that sounds vague as hell, but we'll get into it. This is indeed starring John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, and Lee Marvin. So there's a strong trio here. Oh, and even on top of that, too, just, throwing in casually love interest as well. You got yourself Vera Miles, who
Hmm.
I absolutely loved in The Searchers as well. So, but this was adapted from a 1953 short story by Dorothy M. Johnson. This was entered into the National Film Registry in 2007. Oddly, this was shot in black and white in 1962 by John Ford, who had been making these big, gorgeous Technicolor Vista westerns for a long time. And there was a lot of mixed messages on why
Mm.
they wanted to go this route. And like, there's like John Ford wanted to make it grittier and less romantic take on the West, which it is.
Hmm.
But basically, it seemed like Paramount at that point just like, no, you're not getting the budget for this. Shoot this
Yeah.
in black and white and shoot this on a soundstage. So, and that's what we got.
Hmm.
And Wayne and Stewart um, were considerably older than the characters they're playing, and they Jimmy Stewart's like more his actual age in like the framed narrative.
Yeah.
So another reason they're like, well, if we shoot this in black and white, you can't tell that they're that much older, right?
It's true.
Okay. So it sounds like there was a lot of reasons for them
Yeah.
shooting in black and white. But when it comes down to it, it's probably because they didn't have the money.
Yeah.
Um, but Ford harassed and negged John Wayne throughout the whole entire shoot of this movie. Um,
Really?
yes, they had a very contentious relationship, actually, which is
Hmm.
very interesting because they worked together so much. And
Yeah.
apparently, John Ford was the only one that could really make John Wayne emasculated
Whoa.
because, like, John Wayne had, this big swaggering presence,
Yeah.
and John Ford made him feel like a little child. Uh,
Wow.
he kept giving him shit throughout the whole entire movie about not being in the war because John Wayne did not fight in World War II,
No.
but Ford went off and did films, and like he's like Jimmy did. He went and fought for this
Hmm.
country. So like he was literally pitting his stars against each
That's
other. So
wild.
John Ford was kind of a bastard. Um, I don't know if he was on like Stanley Kubrick level bastard,
Yeah.
but like at least he was emotionally abusing his. So there you go.
How wild.
Now this was actually a big money maker. This did make $8 million on about a $3 million budget at the time. So
Good
seems
on
pretty
them.
sizable.
Yeah.
And this was nominated for an Oscar for Best Costuming for Edith Head, who, for those that don't know, she was the model for Edna Mode in The Incredibles.
That's wild.
So that's who she's based off of is Edith Head, who was a costumer. So, so that's some of my backstory here. But Corey, what were your general thoughts on the film?
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I really liked it. I mean, just from the conversations that you've had, in this wave of John Ford,
Yep.
um, I guess I kind of went in blind. I mean, Westerns aren't really kind of my area of expertise in a lot of
Mm,
cases, especially from this era. And to go in and like, okay, John Ford, like you said earlier,
mm.
sweeping landscapes and all this, and no, you're not getting that in this.
No.
So it's fun to kind of see just like almost like the black sheep
Mm,
of John Ford films, and to that, I think it really worked in its favor on a lot of cases, just how intimate it was, and just from us talking about it being shot in black and white and things like that, just I just got to say that that scene where they're in the uh the oh my gosh, the Shinbone Star, and
mhm,
the he got the candle, he's putting it in, or he's lighting the candle, and then you see Valance and the guys,
mm.
and I just thought that was incredible.
Yeah.
Just some of the shots within the film, but also I really liked the setup of the narrative. I really liked how it really hinted at some of the, not, I wouldn't say themes, but just some of the ideas later on, be it the cactus blossoms and the porch and stuff like that. I thought
Mm,
that was really, really well done in the writing, and I really enjoyed just, it felt just kind of like iconic. Like it felt
mm.
like iconic John Wayne. I don't know much
Yeah.
about him, but I mean, homie's hitting Pilgrim like crazy in this movie.
I'm pretty sure this is where that came from
Okay.
because he did not say Pilgrim in any other of these John Ford movies. I am pretty sure the whole "Hello, Pilgrim"
Bro.
um that probably came from this. I'm
It must
convinced
have,
that came from this
but
because
but
if you made a drinking game of how many times he called Jimmy Stewart Pilgrim, because like his name's Ransom Stoddard,
yeah.
and it's just like, well, that name's not interesting enough. I'm gonna just call you Pilgrim.
Just hitting that like crazy. Yeah, like I wish I counted how many times he said it. That would have been great.
It was a
Um,
lot.
but and then just like I said, I mean, it's like iconic John Wayne, but I think even just like auditorily, just everybody's voice just felt so like iconic of what you like. You close your eyes and it feels like that's what a
Mm,
Western is supposed to sound
yeah.
like.
Which this is interesting because the I had never seen this film before. This was one of the last ones I was super excited about,
Mm,
to be frank. Because this one carries a legacy of being one of his best films.
yeah.
And it really does kind of fit with this whole journey in that like big four that I would say of John Ford films.
Ooh.
Because you have Stagecoach,
Hmm.
you have The Grapes of Wrath, you
Hmm.
have The Searchers, and you have The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. And I feel like these are like the four pillars of John Ford's insane longevity of his career.
Right.
And this is this feels much more Grapes of Wrath than it does Stagecoach and The Searchers from like a filmmaking standpoint.
Hmm.
It is grittier. It is something with the black and white, and that was another thing because there's like I saw like six different explanations on why this was black and white. Another one was, the climactic moment when Liberty Valance gets shot, where you find out what really happened,
Yeah.
how that scene was shot with the shadows and all of that was so good.
Oh yeah.
And, you know, just the way that the camera moved and everything with that very specific camera angle too, where John Wayne's like, give me your rifle. And, Woody Strode just like tosses it over
Oh
to
yeah.
him. And you just have that angle of him. lining it up and you seeing him being shot by Jimmy Stewart. And that whole entire scene is so effective and
Yeah.
so impressive. And this whole entire idea is so interesting because this film was meant to kind of strip down some of the myth of the West, which is so interesting because John Ford was the one, or at least one of the main forces that built up
Yeah.
that West. Him, Howard Hawks, and others who were making Westerns. Because like a lot of John Wayne's like big I'm a hero westerns were like the Howard Hawks ones and stuff like that. You see in the John Ford ones, he's a little bit more interesting and a little bit more dynamic. And here, this film, the whole entire idea, and I could definitely see where there was some influence of this on something like Unforgiven,
Mm.
where Clint Eastwood is literally stripping down and being like, yeah, all those stories you heard about, they're a bunch of bullshit. And that's what this film is about
Yeah.
because Jimmy Stewart's, his character, Ransom Stoddard's whole entire legacy, what he leveraged to become this very famous senator and doing all of these things for his state, all stemmed from you're the man who shot Liberty Valance. And it was a lie.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's so fascinating in terms of like, especially a John Ford Western. Like we are, and it's important to realize like the context of like this is the 60s. So like this isn't like the teens, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s that John Ford's been making movies through. Like this is a new era. This came out around the same time as like the Dollars trilogy.
Hmm.
And this is a different time for westerns and this felt like a different kind of western.
Yeah.
And stripping down that idea. And I loved how the film dealt with that theme of you have a myth and how powerful is a myth and is a myth worth getting behind even if it's not true but it does
Mm.
something good with it
Yeah.
because from what we can tell Jimmy Stewart's character did a lot of good with that myth backing him up and like would have done society any better if we knew that Doniphan, John Wayne's character, was really the man who shot Liberty Valance. And it's an interesting exploration of that. And this gets dark.
Yeah.
Like, first off, Liberty Valance is a dangerous man,
Not a good guy.
not a good guy. And I love Lee Marvin. He was like iconic anti-hero or villain in things.
I will say there's that just picking up on some of the dialogue when they're holding up the stagecoach and
Mhm.
the elderly woman like he rattles Jimmy Stewart pretty well and just they just leave him and the older lady's just like he's gonna die out here and his comeback is just like we'll send him flowers. Like I just love that. That was great.
Yeah, and Lee Marvin just had like that deep
Yeah.
voice. And because like the biggest thing I knew Lee Marvin from was the Dirty Dozen.
Mm.
And like he is certainly an anti-hero in that. He's not like your shining light of military man. He's just like, we're gonna get shit done. How we're gonna do it. And here it's like that's the dark version of like, I don't care about human life. I'm gonna do my job, which is to mess up this small town and stuff like that. And it's interesting seeing Jimmy Stewart in more of these Western roles
Yeah.
because I never knew Jimmy Stewart as a Western actor. It was It's a Wonderful Life, Vertigo. Well, it's mostly Hitchcock films to be perfectly honest, but like these are very different kinds of roles, and he seems like he is that kind of figure
Yeah.
where it's just like I would get behind Jimmy Stewart. And the film kind of plays on that legacy that he had as like Mr. Smith or
Hmm.
George Bailey. And it's just like, what if the story behind Mr. Smith or George Bailey was all a lie? Would it make any of the good that he did any less?
Hmm.
And I do enjoy the dynamic that he has with Vera Miles. I She is definitely an actress that I've seen popping up in more things
Yeah.
that I've watched, and I really like her a lot. she has a lot of charisma. I think
Yeah.
she has great chemistry with Jimmy Stewart in this. And, you know, I didn't expect this film to go in the way of like him opening up a school and like having all those like little moments.
Yeah.
And, John Wayne just like, stop wasting your time in this school and learn how to shoot. And, you have those kinds of moments too, because there's a lot of great supporting actors here too, like Andy Devine, who's, he's son of a bitch.
That is
And
spot on.
he's like the marshal, and he's a coward. Like he's
Yeah,
not doing anything.
he ain't doing nothing.
He's doing nothing. And like Edmund O'Brien and like John Carradine, who popped up a little bit towards the end too, which is so interesting because John Ford worked with a lot of actors for a
Hmm.
long time. I've been in a little bit of Ward Bond withdrawal because he passed away in 1959, so he
Wow.
hasn't been in like the past like 5 or 6 films that I've done of
Yeah.
John Ford's, but like he was in so many John Ford films. John Carradine was in a lot of early ones, so it was interesting seeing him pop up in this. And Andy Devine was in the past too. He was in Stagecoach.
Oh wow.
He was the Stagecoach writer, and he has that very distinct voice. He's there for
Yeah.
comic relief. They made a lot of rotund jokes in Two Rode Together, the last movie that I watched with him in
Man.
it. Um, to the point where he beat up 2 guys with literally belly flopping into them, and it had a bull
Oh
drum
no.
like sound effect. I'm just like, wow,
Cinema.
cinema. And also Jimmy Stewart's character, who was kind of a jerk in that, kept making fat jokes, called him like fatty, all
Oh
kinds of
Lord.
stuff. The whole thing. I'm like, wow, this is the '60s. Um, but this just has such an incredible cast. It's really well shot.
Yeah.
And I was losing a little faith in John Ford later in his career because there were some of the films that I've watched in the past like month or two that just lacked a distinct cinematic voice. That
Mm,
like John Ford had a very distinct feel to his films, and like The Searchers is one of the most dynamically shot westerns you're gonna see. And this one, it made me happy seeing like maybe it was the stripping down things and making him really get creative with stuff, because there's
right.
some really great shots, especially with the shadows and the lighting and stuff like that. This is Jimmy Stewart at his best, John Wayne at his swaggering best, maybe a little bit of a becoming a bit of a cliche of himself. But I think one moment I did not expect was him trying to commit suicide. That
Right?
scene was dark.
Well, it was funny because I mean, I honestly, I mean, like you said, right? John Wayne, he's got a swagger to him. And then after the climax happens and he just gets pissed drunk and the
Yeah.
way he's acting, I'm like, this is hilarious.
Yep.
Like John Wayne trashed. This is great. Just stumbling around. And then like you said, it just
Smashes the
turns.
lantern down.
Wow. Yeah,
And
it was
those,
wild.
because here's the thing, this wasn't CGI back then.
Yeah.
These weren't fake flames. And like that was an intense scene, and you're just like, holy crap.
Right.
And this film has some moments, like especially with Liberty Valance and some of the stuff that he did is like very dark.
Yeah. Oh,
And it also hits on something that I don't think John Ford really hit on a lot, but it was a big part of Shane, my namesake, which yes, I was indeed named after the Western Shane,
hell yeah.
was the big ranchers who were paying gunslingers and stuff like that to rough
True.
up
Yeah.
like homesteaders or small towns. And that's exactly what was happening in this film. That's who Liberty Valance worked for.
Yep.
And there's like this political aspect that kept building up. And I saw some people like their biggest criticism was like this movie should have ended 20 minutes early.
Mm,
And I'm like, they obviously didn't really buy into when it gets like really political,
right.
but I feel like it's important because it felt like if this all built up to the whole entire idea of Liberty Valance was working for these people.
Right.
And like it was John Carradine's character who was like really behind a lot of this, and like him trying to like torpedo Jimmy Stewart's name
Yeah.
towards the end. And like he didn't want to, and that moment where he storms out and he's like, I don't want to be known for killing a man. He's like, well, you didn't. And then that's where we get the like
Right.
flashback, and then we see what actually happened. And it is, when it really comes down to it, the theme of, is a good lie still good if it's a lie?
Hmm.
Like, is it doing something good,
Right.
even if it's built on a lie?
Well, in the way
And
that it affects Jimmy and
mhm,
Rance in this is situation, and I think you get that at the towards the end where
mhm,
he's just like he's saying like what I at least I personally felt like he was saying once the irrigation bill goes, we're out of here. Obviously, he
mhm.
says that, but it's just like I'm done with politics. We're moving back. We're gonna
Yeah.
open up a law firm, call it a day. So he's just getting away from it.
Well, and I feel like this lie probably has worn on him
Oh, for
for
sure.
years and years and years and years. And, you know, even if he did do a lot of great things with this opportunity, it's just like there's trade-off there.
Right.
And you can tell that it's worn on him, and you see that in Ransom in the framed narrative part of it as he's a older man going back. And it becomes that much more powerful when he returns for this funeral.
Yeah. Well, in even that sense, where he's opening up to the editor in the
Mhm,
press about it, and then I just love where like they're saying, right, if the legend's better, then print the legend, and at least for me, it felt like okay, this town kind of, I mean, they support Ransom at the end of the day. They don't really, I wouldn't say care about who really did
mhm.
it. It's just they know who Ransom is at the end of the day, and they're like, yeah, that's it is what it is. And I think that is it's almost like that open invitation for him to come back
Yeah.
home and to start anew around people that will maybe make his conscience feel a little at ease.
Well, and the man who shot at Liberty Valance doesn't sound as good as the man who shot Liberty
Right,
Valance. So,
right.
because he did shoot at him, he didn't land.
No,
Somebody else did.
the man who was
But
shot by Liberty.
yes, which that's a long list, I feel like.
Very.
So,
Oh, I wonder what the list of that bullwhip is. That thing
which
was.
is wild. This I'm glad that I finally got to watch this particular film, because to be honest, I had seen Stagecoach, I had seen Grapes of Wrath, I had seen The Searchers. I've watched The Searchers a lot. That's one of my favorite films. So this was like that last like big one
Nice.
that I hadn't seen, and I was really looking forward to this journey. It only took me 75 weeks to get there, but there were some other ones along the way that I was surprised about that I really loved, but this one was the one that I came in with like the biggest expectations for, and it hit them.
Oh,
Because
good.
like at this point, I only have four
One more.
four more,
Wow.
and I got Donovan's Reef, Cheyenne Autumn, Seven Women, and then he stopped making films. And then he had one documentary come out posthumously in the mid 70s. That's like a 40-minute
Mm.
documentary about a World War II hero. And that's it. That's all she wrote.
Wow.
So I'm not doing any films that are like co-directed
Mm.
in terms of like they directed a piece of an anthology. So like I'm not doing How the West Was Won. I'm fully
Okay.
aware that John Ford directed the John Wayne section of How the West Was Won. I own How the West Was Won. So, but at the end of the day, this is definitely one of those gems of John Ford. But I guess, Corey, do you have anything else that you wanted to add
I
specifically to
think
the film?
I really wanted to touch on the dynamic between John Wayne and
Mhm.
James Stewart in this. I just think like how you were hinting at, right? Like you were saying, I know Jimmy Stewart from It's a Wonderful Life. You get this
Mhm.
kind of this businessman as kind of built behind him. So when he's in this, it's just you're kind of, I wouldn't say expecting that, but he is kind of the embodiment of that ideal. And I mean, if they could, they picked two people that really suit those
Mhm.
kind of extremes with this. So you get kind of the old school John Wayne of the,
Mhm.
the frontier and the conflict between that and the new age, more political savvy, kind of handling
Mhm.
things through the law rather than just by your own, by your gun, if you will, and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So I thought that was really, I think that dynamic was a lot of fun to watch, and the way that they spoke to each other and played off of one another was a lot of fun to watch on there. But I think that was the biggest thing that really, that and obviously, like you hinted at, just the visuals of the contrasts in light and shadows was really cool too. So I had a lot of fun with it.
It's very interesting because the last couple of John Wayne, John Ford films have been a lot of that conflict with another more new aged approach to things.
Mm,
Crap, what was the name of? It was the Horse Soldiers.
okay.
With him and William Holden.
Mm,
And John Wayne's this like swaggering general in the Civil War, and he comes at odds with William Holden's character, who's a doctor. And they have very different approaches on how they should be dealing with like prisoners and the soldiers and
oh,
stuff like
cool.
that. And so that kind of theme is interesting, seeing rippled into other films because yes, Jimmy Stewart's character Ransom is we're going to do this by the law,
Yep.
not by the gun, which is very different for a Western. And it's very interesting because John Wayne hated Westerns like, say, High Noon, that weren't like this glamorized version of the Old West and stuff like that. But, John Ford made this, so I wonder if John Wayne would criticize it because
Yeah.
he would just like put him in his place.
He would have got, yeah, he
Um,
would have got something.
but it's a very interesting dynamic, and it's interesting because Jimmy Stewart and John Wayne were in John Wayne's last film together, The Shootist,
Wow.
which was another Western, and Jimmy Stewart was only in it for like a couple of scenes. He's a doctor in this town, if I'm not mistaken, and The Shootist is John Wayne dying of cancer, like he
Sheesh.
was in real life.
Wowzers.
Um, and he like goes out on his like one last ride kind of thing. And that was 14 years after this. So Jimmy Stewart and John Wayne were still doing stuff together. That was a Don Siegel film, which is interesting. Much grittier kind
Mm,
of filmmaking, who made The Beguiled and Dirty Harry with
okay.
Clint Eastwood,
Yeah.
and then wound up making John Wayne's last film. And it was very interesting because I just brought up Jimmy Stewart's filmography. Jimmy Stewart's last film was An American Tale, Five Goes West,
Heck yes. Give him, what is it?
1991.
Is it the give him the crazy eye? Is that what that is? I can't remember.
He was Wiley. And I haven't watched that movie in so long, I don't
I,
remember what character that would be. But Jimmy Stewart apparently was working into the 90s,
wow.
which is wild. And he was born in 1908.
Whoa.
So he was about 80. Uh about 80, he was 83, his last movie
Wow.
he did. And then he lived until 1997. So good for you, Jimmy Stewart.
Good on Jimmy.
What's wild is Vera Miles is still alive.
Whoa.
Yeah, she was born in
I didn't know that.
1929. She is 95 years old.
Wow.
Yeah,
Good on Vera.
I feel like it's real easy to have just like a throwaway female character in like a John Ford movie like this, and she was not.
Hmm.
I enjoyed her presence in this film, and there's some nice supporting pieces in with the big three that you were
Right.
expecting out of this film. Alrighty, well, that was The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. We have some recommendations for all of you before we wrap up. So, Corey, what would you like to recommend to everybody?
My one and only recommendation, since we're kind of in this Western scape, is the 2022 Western Butcher's Crossing with the Nicolas Cage.
Hmm.
That is mine. What is it? They're in like just in middle America on the plains, going
Hmm.
out hunting buffalo. I think it's great. I really, if we're thinking back to it, I really liked how um, it tiptoed on the ideas of like isolation and how
Hmm.
kind of that stir craziness plays in. So I really like that to it. And of course you get Nicolas Cage in like a bald cap, but knowing Nick, he probably just shaved it and just a beard and just looking gnarly and like shaving his head like crazy.
Hmm.
I was getting Predator vibes. So
Yep. Bill Duke
yeah,
just like
exactly.
this was one of those, because I've written a decent amount about westerns because I am a big fan of westerns, and western as a consistent genre in
Mhm.
film died in the early 90s. Like Unforgiven was like the death of the western being a fixture of American cinema.
Interesting.
But we get like occasional ones that are sprinkled in and stuff like that. And this was one in the past couple years that stood out to me. I did enjoy this quite a bit. This is on Hulu right
Oh,
now.
good. There you
I
go.
did remember my brother. I got my brother to come with me to go see this. I'm like, it's a Nick Cage movie. Definitely very different Nick Cage,
Yeah.
but it's the kind of part of that like past 5 6 years, or whenever like Mandy come out in like 2015. I feel like ever since Mandy he's been doing some interesting things along with jujitsu and crap like that, where they probably paid him a ton of money to film for 5 days. But like between this and Pig, these were the kinds of like he's legitimately putting out a performance here.
Oh, yeah.
And this had some good supporting cast too, with Paul Raci, Jeremy Bobb, Fred Hetchinger, the young man who's in this, who's one of
Yeah.
the emperors in Gladiator 2.
Full
Um,
circle.
so this was definitely a western that really flew under the radar, because I wouldn't be surprised if like not a lot of people even heard of this movie.
Yeah.
I'm taking a quick look. Look, it made like $15,000 at the box office.
Heck yeah.
I was part of that $15,000.
Same.
So, and it was my brother and I think we're the only ones in the theater. So, we we did our part.
Right?
Now, I usually do a new film, watch list film, and a one of my movies rewatched. So this is real fresh. My new movie recommendation is Wicked. Um, if you like musicals,
Right.
if you liked Wicked, which a lot of people have because it is the second highest grossing musical on Broadway
Wow.
ever, it made $1.25 billion in since 2003.
Oh my gosh.
Yep. And it's
I had
still
no
going.
idea. That's wild.
Still going. The Lion King is the highest grossing. It's almost 1.6 billion. Just like the movie,
Right.
which made like $1.7 billion, the new Lion King. But this Cynthia Erivo, I've been a huge fan of since Bad Times at the El Royale,
Mm.
and seeing her
I
in
still
that.
need to see that.
And she sings in that too. And I'm like, she has an amazing voice. And then, she played superhero Harriet Tubman in that Harriet Tubman
Oh yeah.
biopic that felt like a superhero movie, instead of like an actual biopic. Um, and she was the Blue Fairy in Robert Zemeckis's Pinocchio. So like she's had opportunities to sing on film, and this is like her big coming out. And she's fantastic. I was very skeptical of Ariana Grande, but I loved her
Yeah.
in this, and I thought she did a fantastic job. I turned to my wife. This was like months ago, and I'm like,
Yeah.
because she's seen Wicked. I'm like, how disappointed am I going to be with how little screen time Jeff Goldblum has? Which no, he is not in this movie very often,
Uh
but he is Goldblum
when
when
he's
he.
on there, he's giving you the gold balloon.
Yeah, there's so many great songs in this, and overall, I think visually it really came together. Like I think they use CGI way too much in this movie
It
because
looked
like
like it, yeah.
the Emerald City is literally just one giant CGI metropolis and stuff like that. But once you actually get up close to things, there's a lot of great production design and stuff like that and practical sets. So I'm super excited for part two, which is hilarious because like from the opening of the movie, it's Wicked Part One in the actual movie, but they
Wow.
wouldn't market that because they saw what happened with Mission Impossible, Dead Reckoning Part One,
Mm.
which I wish they could go back in time and change two things about that movie. One was call it just Dead Reckoning because now we're getting Final Reckoning. It's not a part two anymore. You didn't have to call it that. And also, I wish they moved it away from Oppenheimer and Barbie. But Tom Cruise is like, no, I'm not moving my movie. See, this is where you failed, Tom Cruise.
Yeah,
But I think Wicked's going to be one of those films that I'll be interested to see how much legs it has because of Moana.
right.
I think I think that's a bit of a challenge, but I had such a blast with it, and I'm a big fan of musicals. So,
I like a few, there's a few like musicals that really stand out to me. And I don't know too much about Wicked, but I haven't yet watched, if you got a review coming out yet on it, but, does it, my biggest, not, I don't know if it's concern, but does it set itself up pretty well as a part two? Because just being that it's one musical and now we're cutting it in half.
so the actual musical is Act One, Act Two, and there's
Okay.
like a 5 year jump
Oh,
in between the acts.
okay.
So like I don't think it's that like I knew exactly where this movie was gonna end. And
Oh,
I knew before I even went into the movie, I'm like, I can only imagine specifically where this is gonna end. And the last 10 minutes of this movie is amazing.
oh, good.
And it's a really interesting story because like the whole entire thing is it's a revisionist Wizard of Oz.
Right,
Like Elphaba wasn't the bad guy the whole time.
right.
And I know a lot of people have seen the musical because like you don't make $1.25 billion by not having a lot of people go see your musical. I'm very interested to see people going into part two and seeing the creative choices that Gregory
Ooh,
Maguire made about the Wizard of Oz because like this is based off a book. So it
right.
was a book in the 90s that turned into a Broadway musical in '03, and then for some ungodly reason it took 21 years
That's
for them to
wild.
release this movie because this has been officially in pre-production since 2017 and
Wow.
they've been trying to get the movie off the ground since 2012.
Interesting. That's wow.
Wild. And like it only took this long
Yeah.
and it's already filmed. They filmed both movies back to back, so like this is coming out next November, so we don't have to wait for like case in point Across the Spider-Verse and Beyond the Spider-Verse because I'm pretty sure Beyond the Spider-Verse is going to come out in like 2028 at
Mm.
this rate.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'm not looking forward to that wait, but at least next November I can go see Wicked Part
We
2.
can complete this, yes.
Yeah. But it is that challenge of like it is one musical, and the stage musical is 2 hours and 30 minutes itself. But then
Whoa.
part one was 2 hours and 40 minutes. I'm really interested to see how long part two is
Interesting. Yeah.
because like this is gonna wind up being like 2 hours. Because if you've seen a Broadway musical, the second act goes a lot quicker and
Hmm.
is probably a lot more like back to back songs and stuff like that. So like I'm interested to see how it all plays out. So we'll see. Um Off the watch list, so you'll be seeing a review coming from the two of us for the fall. So I thought we would shamelessly plug this real quick. So you should check out Corey's Instagram so you could check out our review when it comes out. But
Hmm.
this is a really unexpected and interesting and beautiful fantasy
Oof.
tale told in a framing device of something really depressing.
Oh yeah.
So very
Oh yeah.
depressing. Um, was it is it Tarsh? I know the
Oh,
director's last name is Singh. Um,
I think you're right.
it is Parsim Singh.
Toxic. Yep.
And this was co-written by Dan Gilroy, which was the oddest thing that I saw that. But Lee Pace of, Legolas's hot dad from the Hobbit movies, and also Ronan the Accuser.
Mm,
Um, he winds up, he's the stunt man, and he's very injured, paralyzed, and he builds this connection with this young girl at this hospital, 1920s LA. Does he have the best intent at first? No. But it's very interesting seeing their dynamic grow into this like father-daughter type dynamic.
yeah,
But I feel like the real selling point of this movie is this fantasy tale that he tells,
it's
which is
wild.
wild. And it's colorful and it's vibrant. It's about these four heroes, including Charles Darwin. Uh, so random. And it's just the production design, the costuming, the cinematography, everything about it is so bold and interesting. It's like, even if it doesn't always come together in the end, it's such a bold and ambitious film that it's like hard not to appreciate
Yeah, exactly.
on some level. And it might make you cry at some point. And this is a really interesting thing because this is the first time this is ever streamed on a streaming service, and
I didn't know that. Wow.
it just came out on Mubi in
Movie.
September.
Wow, I didn't even know that.
So apparently, this was like people were waiting a long time for this to finally come out on a streaming service, and there's only one streaming service weird enough to get the fall to be released on it, and it's Mubi.
Movie.
So, which movies like that, like Criterion channels, like, are you a cinephile? You need the
Right.
Criterion channel. If you're like a crazed cinephile and want to watch some really weird shit, you get Movie. So, and this is definitely one of them. Now, my last recommendation is a rewatch. I've watched this movie 3 times in the past year because I've just been so bitten by Hal Pressburger, and that's The Red Shoes. And this is one of Scorsese's favorite films. I watched the whole entire video essay documentary called Made in England about Hal Pressburger, narrated, and basically just it's basically like grandpa's story time with Martin Scorsese telling about the whole entire career of Hal Pressburger. But The Red Shoes is based off of Hans Christian Andersen fable, fairy tale. And this is really a really intense love triangle between this dancer,
Okay.
the composer who's in love with her, and the guy who runs this opera, this ballet, who's in love with her dancing and what her dancing can do for him.
Interesting.
And it's a very interesting dynamic. And there is a performance of the ballet of the Red Shoes. It's about a 20-minute section of this film that is one of the most impressive visual expressions of film I think I've ever watched.
Wow.
And this is on both Criterion Channel and Max, because there's a whole bunch of Criterion releases on Max.
Hmm.
And this is one of the most vibrantly beautiful color films that you'll ever see. And this is from
Wow.
1948, which I remember. So, what opened my eyes to Powell and Pressburg was I randomly watched Black Narcissus from them, and this was like 6 years ago.
Hmm.
It was so wild because I was on a road trip with my brother to North Carolina, so I watched this on my phone.
Oh,
And
wow.
this movie was blew me away so much that it's still in my top like 25 favorite movies.
That's awesome.
And had they had I don't understand how they're not in the same conversation of like Billy Wilder and Hitchcock and William Wyler and Cecil B. DeMille, like these filmmakers that built cinema.
Yeah.
And I don't get it how they're not part of that conversation. But if Martin Scorsese has anything to say about it, they will be. And that's Martin Scorsese, so
Yeah.
he says it,
Yeah.
which
He's an advocate. I like it.
Yes, and I highly recommend the Red Shoes, and it builds and builds and builds to this big, dramatic, tragic climax of a film.
Mm.
And it's such an interesting film. I'm going to be talking about it on my movie club for this month. So
Oh,
that was
nice.
the reason why I've watched it for a third time. Because this is now the third different podcast that I'm talking about this movie on in the past year. Because I did it on Rowan in the Wasteland and then my Wasteland retrospective at one point, and then now this. So
There
there
you
you go.
go. I love it.
Um, I would show you my DVD, my Blu-ray that I had, but somebody lied. I bought a region-free Blu-ray and then put it in. It's like this doesn't work in your region. I'm just like, so I just shelled out $25 for the 4K Criterion collection
Heck
because
yes.
it's half off right now.
That's true.
Because it would have been 50. Um, and uh, only chumps buy Criterion not during the 50% off sale. Because like
I love it.
it happens multiple times a year. Why wouldn't you just not wait
Yeah,
and save
just
half the
wait.
money? So there you go. But those are our recommendations, and that's a wrap on another
Mhm.
episode of Welcome to the Wasteland. And because I specifically mentioned it, Corey, please tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram primarily under Red Eye Film with underscores in between the words. That's where I am. You can check out my collage-like movie reviews there.
Which they're really awesome.
Thank
And
you.
each month we do a collaboration. So check
Yeah.
out The Fall as it's coming out.
I gotta
But
say, I for December, since we're doing the fall for December, I was this close. I think you'll get a kick out of this for picking a horror movie called Santa's Sleigh that is Bill Goldberg as Santa. So that was almost the movie we watched,
if
but the
he
fall
didn't
one.
if he didn't spear somebody in it, I would have been very disappointed.
I still though recommend it. It's corny as hell though. But
I do have to ask, did he said who's next
no,
at all?
there is a fabulous line that is, "Who's your daddy, Father Winter?"
Wild, wild, wild. But that's a wrap here. Thank you all for tuning in and supporting your Wasteland reviewer.